Hey, welcome back everybody to Hector's hard mode. We've reached the island with Utai, however you pronounce his name. This level is kind of difficult. This level is difficult because of the fog. I don't really know all of what's there or what's being reinforced. It is very, very similar to Hector's normal mode. So if you remember, there are pirates that are going to come down just north of where what's his name? Why? I wanted to call him Urk. It's not Urk. That's obviously Urk right there. Anyways, north of the sword, the Myrmidon, is where the pirates come in, and they will be destroyed quickly by Mr. Myrmidon. In the meantime, I gotta send these guys down south because I don't want Urk to get eaten. There are a lot of horse units in this game, or in this board. There's a lot of archer horse units, which is very apt, or what is the word? Apropos of this stage, because I mean your boss is literally a classed up version of your nomad, you know. So Priscilla, you're just going to try to stay out of range. There are a ton, as like every other hard level mode, every other hard version of a game, there are a ton of flyers. Hector's mode had Pegasus Knights as well, but if you want to make a game more difficult, just sprinkle in some flyers. First start out with a couple Pegasus Knights, then add some Wyvern Warriors. Yeah, just fucking make it impossible. Anyways, while we play through this mission, I wanted to mention something. Not that it really matters. It kind of matters to me, and I wanted to sort of get it off my chest. So, this past weekend, my uncle passed away. He was not doing super well, and he was in a care facility. I don't know if it was a nursing home or hospital or what, but he had passed away over the weekend. And my parents, my dad and mom, mom being her sibling, my mom and my uncle are siblings, okay? And my dad and my uncle who passed away were high school classmates and good friend. So, sort of what I wanted to talk about, and I think I have trouble remembering anymore what I talk about from episode to episode, but I think I probably mentioned this last year around this time when my dad had his heart attack. That was probably later in the year though than this, but you get what I'm saying. Is it's hard when you lose someone. And my uncle, I have not really seen much of my uncle in the last couple of years, because our last major family get-together he was at Kristen's, my cousin Kristen's high school graduation. Now, she's the youngest of all the cousins. Yeah, great. And so we were at her high school graduation. He showed up. It was nice, but he seemed to really keep to himself. And he'd been complaining that his back had been bothering him, etc. And a lot of the other family gatherings he had missed because he was complaining of some sort of physical injury he had, when in reality what was really happening was he had gotten cancer, and he didn't want his siblings to know about it. He didn't want anyone to know about it. So basically, he had sworn his children to secrecy so that they would not speak of it, So when my mom and dad went to my cousin's daughter's birthday, she was turning whatever 2 or 3 at that point. The grandfather wasn't there. It seemed kind of odd. But the claim was that he had injured his back, and he was recuperating, and my aunt, his wife, had injured herself as well, and they were sort of laid up. They couldn't really make it because they were recuperating, and they were in such, I wouldn't say pain, but they were injured to the point that it would have been a burden. And if you follow my story, which was plausible enough, if you get injured, and particularly as you get older, you're more prone to like a long-term injury where, you pull a muscle when you're 20, and you go to bed, you pop up out of, I know this is an exaggeration, but you pop up out of bed, and you feel right as rain, and then when you hit 40 or 50, you stub your toe and it hurts for 6 months. It just takes longer to heal is what I'm trying to get at. And sort of that point that became plausible. Well, maybe about a year or so ago, one of my mom's aunts, I guess great aunt is how you refer to them, had accidentally spilled the beans to my mother because she thought that everybody knew, all the brothers and sisters knew, and she sort of had to vent because the nature of all the information that she had found out from my uncle was just a little too much for her to keep to herself. And that's when the brothers, I think, not all the brothers, I know one of them knew about this ahead of time, but essentially he had sworn them all to secrecy, and they had basically kept their mouths shut. There's a couple different directions I kind of think about this, and on the one hand, what he did, it plays, and I really shouldn't reference this because anyone can do this. They don't have to be a particular person or background or religion or political affiliation or whatever. But he very much was one of those, if I can't do it by myself, I don't need anybody's help. One of those kind of people that if they could, they'd go off the grid just to prove that they could do it. So they could live within the United States, but not have to obey any of its laws or rules, except for the laws or rules that they saw fit to abide by. I don't need your stinking electricity. I don't need your stinking gas or your heat. I can take care of myself, move out in the middle of the wilderness, cut down the trees I need to cut down, hunt the local animals that I need to hunt, and be completely off the grid and completely not a member of society, if for no other reason than because I can. Now, my uncle was never that far off the beaten path. He lived more or less a normal, domestic, suburban life. He owned his own business, and the money he made was his, and the money he didn't make was his. Anything he did was entirely on himself. He didn't have any other employees. It was all on him. Whatever money he brought in to his family was his and his alone's doing. It's if you want to look at it that way, it's very admirable. You're putting your family's future squarely on your shoulders. Now, mind you, my aunt also worked, and she was a lawyer, so she probably made decent money as well. But as a man, speaking as a man, you're wanting to bring money into the family to support the family, and he had 4 kids. It wasn't like he was a dual income, no kids kind of guy. He had 4 kids, and I don't know. He was, as all people are, he was a complicated person. He wasn't. You couldn't just. If you want to, you could try to. If you want to try and sum up a person's life, you could easily do it and go, this person was a dickhead because he was a jerk. But at the same time, we're not all jerks. All the time. We can have some jerky moments. We can have some nice moments. We can have some moments that kind of make us like saints. And we can have moments where we might as well be the devil. And I'm dancing around it, but my uncle was a little bit of a domineering kind of guy, and I know that kind of affected my cousins in a negative way in a lot of cases. But again, I don't know the whole story, and sort of, again, about 6 months ago at my younger cousin's wedding, she got married, and that's when I found out my uncle he was battling cancer at that point. It had not gotten to the point where, which is what had happened in the last month, where it came back, which unfortunately in this day and age, if you get cancer, you can beat it. If it comes back, you're dead. And I'm sure there are people out there that have come back from cancer and beat it. And certainly being diagnosed with cancer, particularly if you do it early on, you can, and depending on where it is in your body, you can do what you need to do and get rid of the cancer and live another full, healthy life. Cancer is one of those things that it's kind of like it's kind of like a virus, you know. It's got a mind of its own. It'll evolve. It'll fix itself, you know, or you'll eliminate the cancer that you're able to eliminate and leave the cancer that's resistant to treatment. And then that's the one that propagates, and that's the one that'll ultimately get you, because, you know, say you've got a cancer cell somewhere and you have the lump removed and you treat the surrounding area with chemotherapy. Well, the chemotherapy is kind of like the way it was explained to me was it's kind of like parking your car outside in a hailstorm. Is your car going to get hit with the hailstones? Probably. It's very unlikely that that if it starts hailing in your area, like let's say golf ball size hail, it's very unlikely that it's going to hail all around your car if it's out in the open, and it's not going to hit any part of your car. Your car's going to get hit, but it's not going to dent every part of your car necessarily. It may hit certain sections of your car, like your hood, your roof, your you know, but it's not going to literally hit every single spot. You know, your entire, let's say, just say your trunk or your hood of your car is your body. It's not going to turn into a giant crater where everything has been equally hit by this hailstones. You're going to have dents here, you're going to have dents in other places, but you're going to have some smooth areas where the hail did not hit at all. And that's kind of what chemotherapy, as I understand it, is like, where they shoot the radiation at you, at that section, but it doesn't guarantee that it's not going to hit everything. It's going to hit, they're going to try to hit as much as they can, and the hope is that if you draw, you know, if you have cancer and it's spread out in a number of different places, the hope is the chemotherapy or the radiation, I think it's the radiation actually, will hit the spaces, because it's going to hit healthy cells. That's one of the big downsides of radiation, is whether you like it or not, the radiation is going to hit your healthy cells, because you're shooting like a shotgun or like hail into your body, and you're going to try to kill all the cancer cells that way. And the hope is that if you do enough radiation and the cancer remains in a close enough position, while you will be weakened, while you'll hopefully kill all those cancer cells and leave no cancer behind. But there's also a possibility that one of the tiny spots the radiation missed happens to also be a cancer cell. And over the course of months or years, the cancer grows back. And this time, this cancer may be, you know how they often say, like, well, why is it that if we get a flu shot every year, there's always another flu? Well, because this flu strain has a certain resistance against certain antibodies, but the next flu strain may not. It may have a resistance to other things. So you can't just use one inoculation to take out all of the flu virus, because it's so varied that it's impossible to do. So really, you just try to stay ahead of the curve as best you can. I guess I'm getting off topic a little bit, as I always do. But I don't know. I probably mentioned this when my dad had his heart attack. He's more or less fine now, but we were out picking up leaves this past weekend before we found out my uncle passed, because it was overnight between Saturday to Sunday. And I don't know. You want the people in your life to live as normal of a life as they possibly can. And at the same time, you can't just sit on his ass and not exercise, because that's not good for your heart. But I worry about him stressing his heart as well and causing himself an additional problem. But the heart is a muscle, and ultimately you have to use it or you lose it. So, a little bit of strain, a little bit of stress is always good for your muscles, as long as you don't pull your muscle, or you're not over-exercising and overexerting yourself and causing undue stress and wear and tear to your body. But I know I've mentioned this before, but my grandparents, for the most part, all lived close to 90 years old. Both grandfathers were well over 90, like 92, 93. My oldest grandfather was about 97 when he passed. Grandmothers were right around 90. I think my grandmother on my dad's side had just turned 90 years old before she had passed. And I don't know how old my other grandmother was. She was younger than the rest. I know that. I don't think she quite made 90. I think she was in her mid-80s at that point. But I don't know. It's hard for me to really tell, because I never, a gentleman never asks and a lady never tells. But I don't know. I kind of look at it that way and think to myself, my father, my uncle, they're like seven. I think he's 73. They'll be 74 this year. I think they were both born in 1950. They'll be 74 this year. And I like to imagine my father, and I know it's you want to give it to a higher power, or you want to give it to time, or whatever you want to call it. But I want to imagine that I've got 15 more years with my father. And I wanted to imagine that I had 15 more years with my uncle still. And I know God calls us home at different times. And I know things aren't for me to decide when people go. And it's some of it has to do with the higher power, I believe. Some of it may have to do with what have you done with your life. I mean, and I'm one of those people that I mentioned in an earlier episode, that if God knows everything I'm ever going to do, from the first breath to the last breath I ever take, every moment, every thought, every action, every decision I'll ever make, that is for him to know and for me to discover. But I know for a fact that if I continue to do just what I'm doing today, I'll never be married. I'll never have children. I'll never be able to experience a number of those things, because it's not, even if God knows exactly what I'm going to do before I do it, it's A, not for me to know, and B, it is up to me to live my own life. Regardless of predestination, we all, in my imagination at least, have free will to choose what we do. Whether or not that's all been written down in a book long before we were a speck on the earth. It's if he knows, and nothing I do ultimately matters in the great book of life, in humanity's journey, you know, then so be it. But as I've been dancing around before, and I've said before, I like to imagine that, at least in my mind, that God knows what I'm going to do up until the moment I make a decision. And then at that point, you know, my world changes. And, you know, I know you can sort of kind of marry those two things together, where God knows what you're going to do because he knows you, and he knows the decisions you're going to make based on all of the things that happen, because he's all-knowing and all-seeing. Okay? But again, like I said, I know that if I do nothing, nothing changes. And ultimately, maybe that's that's part of free will. I mean, it is part of free will, you know. The fact that if you choose to do nothing, nothing's going to change. And only by you choosing to make a decision in your life does anything actually occur. You know? And I don't know. In saying that, I kind of want to imagine, as many people do when someone passes away, wasn't there more they could have done? Yeah, I mean, but it doesn't mean that even if you had gotten it early, that you would have, and you thought something was off, you were going to necessarily take into consideration that and go to the doctors early. Or maybe the symptoms were just so mild and minor, you know, like, for instance, you know, I'll give you an example. I occasionally, when I'm lifting stuff, I'll pull a muscle in my chest. And when you start getting those chest pains in that particular area, and it's one of those telltale signs that they tell you that's what male heart attacks look like, I'm not gonna lie, I've freaked out before. Even though it's just nothing more than in my head. But at the same time, when do you know when you're just being anxious or hyperventilating about something that's not wrong with you, and when you're actually dealing with something that is going to change your life? And I understand at the end of our days, something's gonna get up. Our valve in our heart's gonna clog. Cancer is going to get us, you know, either because it's zapping, it's using too much energy, and it's pulling too much energy away from you, away from what the body needs to continue to be healthy, or if it begins to actually affect your ability to breathe and other basic respiratory functions or eat. We're all gonna go at some point. Even if that's just your lungs are not taking in the amount of oxygen it take in, and you're slowly but surely. And I understand this is sort of a hard way of looking at this, but you sort of suffocate in a way, even though that's not really how that works. Because you're not like, it's not like putting the pillow or the plastic bag over your head and you die of asphyxiation. It's more like your body's not pulling enough oxygen, but you are pulling oxygen. And ultimately you end up, you know, falling asleep essentially is what it is. You fall asleep. But, you know, we all die in some way. As much as I hate to admit it. Because it is the one thing that, more than anything, that has scared me from such a young childhood, is the fact that I'm not in control of anything. And that ultimately all things come to an end. You know? And that in some ways the death's kind of lurking around every corner. Can be lurking behind every corner. Because you can live the most sheltered, protected life. Tree falls in your house, you happen to be in that room, not much you can do about it. Cut all the trees down, whatever. Lightning bolt strikes your house, lights on fire. Maybe you don't get out. Car runs you over. Hard to say. Yeah. And in my own way, I'm gonna miss my uncle. And I know that as a person who thinks too much and lives too little, I've in a way prepared myself many times for the inevitabilities that are coming my way, whether they be 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, or 100 years from now. Yeah. I mean, all I can say is I'm gonna miss my uncle. And that might not be the point, the amount that other people miss him. But I'll miss him in my own special way.